Hello, guys, and welcome to this week's episode of the Limitless Landscapes podcast. I'm Paula, your host, and today I'm taking you a bit behind the scenes with my landscaping business because not everyone's journey is the same. And I just want to raise a few things that you might find of interest if you are comparing yourself to me or anyone else in the industry that's been going similar time to you. If you're intrigued, just go to the show.
As the co-founders of the Landscaper Circle, we help you get more money, time and freedom to become limitless through our experiences as fellow landscapers and our tried and tested methods. If you want help with your marketing, managing or growing your business, you've definitely come to the right place. If you're a landscaper, garden designer or supplier to the industry, then hit subscribe so you never miss an episode. Now, let's get back to the show.
Hello, lovely people. How are you? It's Wednesday again. How are you doing? How's business? How's life? What's been going on? Today, this episode comes from a comment I had from one of my wonderful TLC clients about where they are in business compared to me. And we've been going a similar level of time. And it's something that I speak to a lot of my clients about when they are looking at where they are, where they've come from, how much they've achieved, etc. And you can really start to compare yourself to others. But when we do that, all we are generally doing is wasting precious energy focused on other people's lives than our own. I want to also make you aware of, or remind you, because you'll already be aware of this, that not everything is what it seems. So particularly now we are in the day and age of social media. Yay! Not my favorite thing, as you can tell, but essentially it's a lot of smoke and mirrors. Not everyone is their authentic and genuine selves on there. Not everyone feels comfortable to be their authentic and genuine selves. And generally, we only really post about the great things that are happening. You don't tend to post about all the crap that happens in your lives, in your businesses, because it would make an interesting post, it'd make a very real post, and you'd probably get quite a lot of support and positive feedback out of it. However, no one likes to put themselves out there like that in case they are getting judged, in case we're looking at imposter syndrome, comparisonitis, all of those things play a part in that. So today I just really wanted to get a little bit real with you guys because not everyone's journey is the same. And something I learned many years ago when I was part of the Entrepreneur Circle actually was you should never compare your chapter 12 to someone else's chapter 1 or vice versa, your chapter 1 someone else's chapter 22, because ultimately all of our journeys are very different, and where we are in business today is very different to someone else in a seemingly similar business. So I wanted to just take you a bit behind the scenes with Aura Landscapes and just share some ups and downs that I've had in my business over the time that might make you feel a little bit better about yours. You might actually see something of yourself in this journey. It might help you to realize that not everything is as it seems on the surface. And generally, hopefully, to inspire and motivate you to grow and develop your own businesses. As I am the landscapes coach, I am here to support you in any way I can. If you want to drop me a line or you have something that you're struggling with in business, then drop me a line, drop me a DM on Instagram or Paula at thelandscaperscoach.co.uk. So let's get into it. So yeah, I started my business in 2010, February 2010. I began, or not I, Michael began Aura Landscapes Limited. It was him, a van and a labourer and standard tools. And we started it after he had a partnership that went sour. So him and a guy had a partnership. They had something called Roma Roads, very interesting name for a landscaping company. And it went a bit wrong, mainly when you see in a partnership that someone takes on more than the other, more work than the other, and boundaries and lines are blurred. So essentially, they busted the company and Mike set up on his own as Aura Landscapes. Now, I can't remember the exact date, but a couple of years in, I became part of Aura Landscapes and started taking over the marketing and the sales initially. I was just in charge of bringing in new clients and helping with client contact, essentially, to help improve the sales. Mike still did the site visits, but I also used to be on the tools at weekends. I used to be a labourer for Mike. I used to help out. I used to go and sweep in sand to finish off a driveway and get payment by the client. I remember doing it on the way home from my sales job at the time as well, rocking up on site in an interesting outfit of office workwear with high heels, sweeping in some sand. The client did not mind. In fact, they found it quite sweet that we were a husband and wife team and we were doing this together. And essentially, what I'm trying to give you an overview is even the startup of a business is very different from one person to another. Some people have a major plan in place. I'm working with one client at the moment who's looking to launch his landscaping business. And we're setting a plan completely in place for that to happen early next year. Sometimes there is no plan and you're just winging it and hoping that the business continues to develop. Sometimes you manage to have half a plan. And I think that's what we did. We had half a plan. And we began to put that plan into motion. We knew we wanted to grow the business. We knew because I now had become part of the company, I had to pay myself through the company. So therefore, we needed to cover both our salaries through Aura Landscapes. That was the main aim for me to come away from, at that time, I was doing sales consultancy and impact sales. So going into gyms and selling gym memberships and basically getting a lot of commission for doing so, managing sales teams, that sort of thing. And essentially, I wanted to ideally become Aura Landscapes full time. So that was the plan at that time. So we needed to generate enough money to have two salaries. Now, I want to be clear, we had no investment, no capital to get started. We did everything by borrowing. We bought our van. I think it was a cheap van, but we put it on finance. Same with tools. I think we used a credit card. We didn't have any capital. And in fact, where Mike had busted the ex-business with his partner, he actually had some debt to pay off. They'd taken half the debt each that they need to pay back. So they did that. So we actually started Aura Landscapes with a bit of debt from the old company and also the new debt from having to get the tools, the van and everything going for this business. So we didn't start in the same place that other people might start, with a good influx of capital, but we carried on. Now, over the course of the last 13 years, people might see me, see the marketing I do, see the website we produce, see the work we produce. And yes, we're a high-end, high-quality design, landscaping, now maintenance company. However, over the last 13 years, we have overcome multiple hurdles. So just to put it into perspective, we have tried lots of different things. Being an entrepreneur, we have decided to have a go at other things. And one of those was importing stone. And this was approximately, 2014? I know that because I bought my house when Mike flew to China to go and look at some stone. So it was April 2014. We'd moved into a new house. We decided we needed a bigger property with a driveway to actually be able to park our vans on said driveway. And essentially, we were looking for a yard space at the time as well. And part of the reason we bought this house was a yard came up about 5 minutes drive down the road, and we ended up signing a lease on that at the same time. But that's another part of the story. But essentially, Mike flew to China with a friend, looked at some stone, visited quarries, thought he'd done all the right things. And then we spent, I think it was approximately £10,000 on some stone to be imported. Queue waiting a number of weeks for it to be manufactured and come through, quarried and imported. It gets stuck in customs because I can't remember, I think it had some sort of disease on it, or there was something wrong that held it then in customs for a while. When it was eventually released and we went to look at it, you can imagine our absoluteness when we found that the stone hadn't been finished. It had not been sawn, basically. It hadn't been finished at all. And it was a really cool It was a really cool stone, but it wasn't finished properly, therefore we couldn't sell it. So essentially we lost £10,000 immediately. We looked at various different options for it, whether we could get it finished here in the UK and the cost for that. We looked at so much stuff, but again, at the time, the decision was made that, do you know what, that's not for us. It's just going to have to be a loss. Sometimes not everything you try goes well. And no, not many people know that story because I don't tend to publicize it. I don't publish the bad stuff that happens. I probably should, because you'd all realize that actually my journey is not as smooth running as you might think. And we all have shit to deal with. So that was just one highlight in the downs of running a business. But essentially, I wanted to share that because that could have really impacted quite badly on our small business. And it did affect our cash flow and it did affect our accounts for a couple of years going forward as we tried to recoup the loss. Because in that same time, I think we basically signed on the yard at the same time. So we took on a space which now was cheap. It was about £800 a month for basically office space inside. I had 2 offices, a big open plan, one that we all worked in, and then one at the back, which I sublet out, complete with toilets and everything. And then outside, we also had the yard space where we could keep aggregate, our vans. Everyone had somewhere to park. We had storage containers on there for all the tools. We had places to store products, excess products, etc. And that was really well. That was when we took the business and grew it quite large, actually. We had 3 people in the office alone generating leads and sales and doing all the marketing, doing all the things that need to be done. I had the 2 children. Well, I had one at the time. And then just before the second one came along, we nearly went bust. Now, I have spoken about this a couple of times because it was one of the major pivotal points in our business life, in the fact that I remember very clearly the day when I was like, is this worth going bust over? And I think it was probably about £40,000 in the end that we owed. And there was a lot of issues. There was a lot of staff issues because we'd grown so exponentially, so quickly. We'd had to take on a lot more overheads, vehicles. We were also doing artificial grass. Yes, I know, I don't even like to mention that, but that was one foray we went into when a friend of ours joined Namgrass. We started being one of their approved installers and started installing that awful stuff. And eventually we closed that side of the business for multiple reasons, which I expect you already know, not least because of how poor it is for the environment, but also how hot it gets, which we found out from a client of ours. But anyway, going back to the original story, I remember me being sat in what is now, we've got a beautiful home, but it was a 1930s 2-bedroom bungalow, 1 2-year-old, 1 baby in the oven, and 40 grand's worth of debt to repay, or if we couldn't repay it, to bust the company. Now, having a limited company, I sought the advice of an insolvency practitioner to discuss where I should go. And I will never forget the conversation I had with him. And it was basically that you can go bust quite easily. You're a limited company. He told me how it would work, what you would generally be liable for and not liable for, what you could and couldn't do going forward. He went through absolutely everything. He was a brilliant guy, actually, very knowledgeable, knew his stuff. But what he also said to me was, Paula, if I was you, I've looked at how you could trade out of this. So basically, he'd asked me to go and do cash flow forecasting. Now, I really am a massive advocate for cash flow forecasting you out of every situation. And he told me before our meeting to come with options. If you did X, what would happen to the cash flow? If you did Y, what would happen to the cash flow? If you did Z, what would happen to the cash flow? And map it all out and then go back to him and chat through it. And he said to me, looking at what you have forecast, I do not think you should go bust. I think you should trade out of it, and I think you could easily do it. I don't think it's worth losing your reputation as a company. And that stuck with me because it has now made me even more determined that I won't let that happen again. And so we made a decision that day that we wouldn't let it happen again. And that mainly stems from learning a lot through that one lesson And it also, so everything that we learnt going through that, it was an awful time. Not many people knew we were going through it. It was a really awful time. We had to make some really big decisions, like we had to make people redundant, we had to let go of the office, we had to sell some vans, sell some tools. It wasn't an easy process and it wasn't an easy period, but we learned so much from it that it now has become a thing for me. So every time we go through any hurdle, and there are lots as a business owner, I repeat that conversation back that I had with the insolvency practitioner and reapply it, because ultimately, can you trade out of things if you work out a way through it? Could you find a solution to something? Most of the time, yes. Sometimes the easy option isn't the way. And if I spoke a whole lot on this in my last podcast episode last week about taking the easy route over the hard route and why you should choose your hard. And that was one of the times when I chose the hard slog. So another year, another debt, this time of 40K that we had to trade out of. I'm sharing these kind of scenarios, real life scenarios that have actually happened to me. So a bit of behind the scenes stuff that I don't always share because I don't want to be judged. I don't want to feel embarrassed, but they're really important because we don't tend to talk about these things because it's considered bad, it's considered wrong. So we always want to put on our best front. And the main things I've learned through going just those two isolated instances is you are stronger than you think. And actually, the hardest route is the most rewarding, because even though on both of those, it was really a problem with cash flow, we made some decisions which impacted hugely on cash flow. And also it was managing people, managing growth. I had no experience of it at the time. We'd grown steadily, easily. We hadn't had to take on any loans at this point. We were very much a steady growth company. And then we grew exponentially too quickly. And I was busy in the background becoming a mum. And so my eye came off the ball and I had to rely on other people that perhaps couldn't do the job I'd asked them to because I hadn't set up the processes and systems, which is why I learned that lesson as well. So going forward in my business, systems and processes are key to growth, particularly when you're growing a company like we do in the landscaping industry. So those were like two really interesting times and things that could have ruined the business. But ultimately, I chose the reputation of the business over the easy path of busting it and starting again. And part of that is pride. And part of it is when you run a business for as long as we have, it becomes your child. It becomes like a child that you've born, you've watched it grow, you've had some good times and bad, but essentially it's really hard to let go. I struggle with the concept of giving up because that is your baby and you want to nurture it and watch it develop. It's things that have helped me as I've gone on my journey is having the right support network around me. So of course I'm lucky I get to work with my husband, Mike. That's a good and a bad thing at times, but ultimately it's good because we're working towards a common goal. Our visions are similar. We are on the same path. So it's really good. And it's someone to share things with, which I find some of my clients having me just to be a sounding board that they can't do at home because they don't want to bring their issues back to their husband or wife or partners. So I find that I'm really lucky in that respect to get to work with my husband. We don't work together like next to each other every day. He's out on site. I'm behind the scenes in the business, working on the business. But it's really nice that we get to do this together for our family, for our future. And I really love that. So that's been a major bonus for me and a huge pillar of support. The other thing is the coaches I've had over time. Now, my very first coach in business was the one that told me to set up a cash flow forecast. I can't even remember how many years we've been in business. We'd bought our first house. I had gone full time in Aura Landscapes at this point, and I'd enrolled onto one of those government-backed schemes where you get access to like business webinars and also a mentor. And I had this guy, and he was really nice, really cool. He'd run his own businesses. He'd been part of this set up as a mentor. And so I had a number of sessions with him working on the business and how to set things up. And the most important thing he told me was, when I came to him, said, well, I want to get a yard. I want a yard. I have these big plans. How am I going to do it? I don't know what to do. I've never done this before. What do I do? And he said, have you run the figures? And I said, what do you mean? He said, have you run a cash flow forecast? And I said, what is a cash flow forecast? And he literally took me through and helped me set up my very first cash flow forecast, and essentially explained the concept behind it that I try and help you guys. So it was all down to him. But essentially, it is monitoring the money coming in and out and ensuring that you have enough money to pay people, you have enough money to run the business. We are breaking even, at least, hopefully making profit rather than breaking even. But essentially, it also means that you can plan out growth strategies. So if one of your growth strategies is to get a yard or an office, then it's about planning that in. So looking at how much extra that's going to cost you, and then how that extra cost is going to be covered. So how many jobs would you need to bring in to cover that? It was a very simple thing to do. And actually, when you get your head around it, it's a very easy thing to do. And but the biggest benefits was that was the reason we managed to get our first yard space, because he basically took me through the process, which was run the numbers, find the place that you want, see if it works, determine a lease, make sure there's a break clause. All of these important things I had never thought to ask, never thought to know anything. We'd bought our second house, or we're looking to buy our next house at the time, and looking to get a yard at the same time. And I just had no idea what to start with and how to start. And he just started the process of cash flow forecast, and then looking for places to rent and find out what the costs were, and what the rent, not just the rent, but where their business rates, and how, if you're going to grow, how will that serve you? How will you make money from this investment? And it might not be making money from, like, I sublet part of the office, but that was to help bring the cost in line with what we could afford. I also knew I was going to have to employ some more office staff, so that was a bigger cost. So therefore, what did I need to do to bring in that cost? I need to set up another team, need to sell more products and services, etc., etc. So it's really looking at the whole business and how that works. And for me, the key point is the cash flow forecast. So if I hadn't had that business mentor, I'd have gone another few years probably without knowing the importance and value of a cash flow forecast. I also mentioned how it helped me solve my problems when it came to, should I bust the business or not? Absolutely, the cash flow forecast helped me grow out of that and prevent that from happening. And it continues to do this as I go through the journey of running a business. So every time I have an idea, so for instance, at the moment, the here and now, the present focus is the showroom. So we have a small showroom that we're building at present, which doubles as an office space as well. So we've got an office space, showroom space, and outdoor space. We have now been offered to take over another building on the same plot of land, which means we'd have a lot more open outdoor space, we'd have lots of parking, we'd have 2 sections for the business to run from. And now I'm going to have to go back to my cash flow forecast and run the numbers to see if it's worthwhile doing that or keeping it in the smaller space. Because we are looking all the time as to, if we do take on this cost, what needs to happen? What do we need to bring in? How does that impact sales? Because ultimately, that's what it's all about: income versus outcome, and ideally, a big profit in between. That is the key to a successful business. Now, something I am also pulling across from my lessons learned in the earlier years of Aura Landscapes is the fact that I need some systems and process in place. It's still just as difficult now as it felt back then to develop these systems and to get them out of my head and to make people follow them or encourage them to follow them and get a whole company buy-in. So I'll do more on this as I go through that journey, but I have outsourced part of that to Nicola De Piazzi of Systemology, because I just know that I will never get round to it. I have a to-do list as long as my arm. You guys probably do as well. So I've now decided that the numbers say it can happen. I've outsourced it to Nicola, which takes a huge weight off my shoulders, and it makes me feel a lot happier that I am starting to actually get these processes and systems in place, because they really do need to, particularly now as we're going into another growth phase with more staff. We need to know where we're at. So that's really important. Another not very well publicized thing that we went through a few years ago is we were taken to court by a client, and wrongfully, I may add, but we got really poor advice. We ended up going all the way to court. It took many years. I think it took about 3 or 4 years to get to court, in which case we were adamant we were correct, and I still am to this day, adamant that we'd done nothing wrong. However, I also was of the belief back then that the truth will out. And what I've since learned is that is not the way it works. Regardless whether you are reputable, whether you stuck to the letter of installation or not, if they've got a good barrister and what I think is dodgy evidence, shall we say, and if you take advice from the wrong people, and yeah, it can all go horribly wrong. If anyone wants to ask me any more on that, let me know. But essentially, it went horribly wrong, and we lost. And with court fees, where it had been going on for so long, that's not to include, by the way, our own solicitors' fees when we started the process. We then decided not to utilise the solicitors going forward and do it ourselves. Again, another incorrect thing to do. Looking back, I would never have done that, but then I would never have been able to afford the cost of the solicitor going on for that long. And again, poor representation meant that we lost to the tune of £54,000 awarded. So at that point, we were again given a choice where, do we close the company? This time you're in a deficit of £54,000 as you go home that evening. And for Mike, it was devastating. I think we cried for a day, certainly felt that way, because he had been in court for 2 days straight. He could see it was going the wrong way. He could see all the errors that we'd made in our evidence putting across. He could see the errors we'd made in the people that represented us, and he could see which way it was going. So eventually, when it was awarded, he was exhausted. He'd been in court, say, for 2 days straight, and it is gutting. And essentially, it's gutting because it's unfair, because it's not correct. It's just awful to even speak about now. And this is a couple of years ago, but essentially, we had to then find £54,000. So I went straight back into solution mode, because over the years of running this business, one, I am confident in the quality and the workmanship we do. So I knew it wasn't that we'd done anything wrong. It was nothing to do with what they'd pulled apart. It was all to do with ground movement, which they tried to pin on us when we didn't do the groundwork. But that's another story. Essentially, I stood by the values and the quality of my business and the quality that we give to our clients. And I had to make a choice again. Do we quit? And what does that look like for us? What does that look like for us? Or do we find a solution? And essentially that first step was contacting the client and negotiating a lower rate. So I managed to get down to 45,000, which I thought was pretty good, actually. It was just a conversation. And it meant stepping outside my comfort zone, like I've spoken about on the last week's podcast, and having a word with myself and just getting on and seeing how I could do this. And then it meant seeing how much money was in the bank. So going back to the cash flow forecast and seeing what was there that we could utilize to pay. And then asking for help from the in-laws, which thankfully they did. And they lent us the rest of the money, of which we are paying them back still now. So essentially we did it. We paid it off and we carried on. The most horrible thing about it all is the fact that I never wanted to talk about it, neither did Mike, and also the people that were involved that gave us poor advice. So it's been very much brushed under the carpet. but that experience has stuck with me, and it's again given me some valuable lessons in that you shouldn't just believe everything these experts tell you, because it doesn't always pan out the way they say. There are always, you've got to consider proper legal advice. You've got to consider different things. So I'm just urging you all, when you're thinking about everything and you're looking at different experts, be wary, because not all advice is good advice, no matter how expert they say they are. So that was another big blow. And it was another point in the business where I thought, what's the blooming point in all this? It's so stressful. But it comes down to the fact that I love what I do. I love doing this podcast and helping some landscapers out there that might be in the same position. I might have just detailed what you're going through right now and you're thinking, thank God I'm not alone. Or you might be thinking, shit, I'm getting out of this, because that sounds a bit scary to me. But essentially, I love doing this podcast, helping you guys. I love running my landscaping business. I love seeing it grow and develop and change year on year. I love finding new people to work with. And when you get good team members and the correct staff around you, your business just flourishes. There's so many good things that we've achieved in the business. I'm focusing on all the hurdles that have come, and I've missed out loads, because there's 13 years we're talking about, going into year 14 in February. The massive positives is I think we've won 36 or 38 awards over this time for design and build and business practices as well. I've won Entrepreneur of the Year a couple of times. It's been a really cool journey, and we've built something from essentially nothing by ourselves, which I'm super proud of. And the way I like to give back is through being the landscapers coach, so I can share with you my experiences that you can gain from, and also being that sounding board for you if you're on your own and you've got no one to talk to about the business and what's going on and you just need some help. That's what I'm there for. So this is why I thought it was really important, because whether you are turning over £10,000 a year or £100,000 a year or £10 million a year, whatever, your journey is your journey, and you shouldn't compare it to anybody else's, because what on the surface isn't always what they've gone through. People will see us as a successful landscaping company, and you'd be right, but it's not to say we've not overcome so many hurdles to get to this point. It's not an easy ride, and there is no magic pill, and there's not one thing I can tell you to do that's going to make your life easier. Similarly, it's all about taking action, and it's all about taking action from the correct mindset. Now, my mindset has always been on the glass half full. I've always been of the positive mindset. Mike sometimes comes from the glass half empty, and I have to try and train him in the way of positive mental attitude, because it comes from a place where I believe we can be the best landscaping company in the South. I believe that my business is going to be able to be sold at one point and I can retire. I've got a belief in me that allows me to take action from that point of view. If you're trying to take action and you still have doubts, you still have a negative mindset, you still have mindset issues you're not working on, then that whatever actions you do are not going to work, or they'll work in the short term but not in the long term. So you have to be mindful of that. You have to be mindful of the mindset that sits at the back and the belief that you have around your goals and your visions, but also the action point. If you choose to take action, now every time I've worked with a coach myself, I have chosen to take action. If you choose not to take action or to do something completely different to what other people are suggesting you do, then it's only on you if it doesn't work out. So it's really important. Mindset, belief, action, and really learning. Take the lessons, because everything that happens to you is happening for you. Everything happens for you for a reason, and you are where you are because that is your journey at the moment. It's different for everybody. That's why life is so exciting. It's varied, it's exciting. And by talking to others, we all have different journeys and we all have different experiences we can share and learn from. So that's my behind the scenes today. I hope you've taken something from it. Do send me a message if I've touched upon anything that you want to know more about, that you're struggling with. If you've just got any questions, give me a shout. And I look forward to seeing you guys next week on the next episode of the Limitless Landscapers podcast.